The Vatican releases new guidance for families, what the Pope's message means to Catholics, and how it's being interpreted around the world. Bernie Sanders receives an invitation from the Vatican, why the presidential candidate is traveling to Rome. Offshore accounts, how the so-called Panama Papers raise questions about certain world leaders. And a developing story, the arrest of one of the most wanted terror suspects on the planet. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, April 8th, 2016. Good evening, and thank you for joining us. I'm Lauren Ashburn. The Vatican releases a major document on the family today. It's called Amoris Laetitia, Latin for the joy of love. The document reflects on the beauty of the family life, but also tackles the thorny issue of divorced and remarried Catholics receiving communion. The 250-page-plus document was unveiled to the public this morning. It's called an apostolic exhortation. It does not define church doctrine. Brings together the results of 2 meetings on the family convened by Pope Francis in 2014 and 2015. It begins with an exploration of current challenges and ends on a spiritual examination of marriage and the family. The joy of love fully affirms the Church's teaching that marriage is, quote, a lifelong bond between a man and a woman who are open to having children. It closes the door on same-sex unions. The Holy Father says some church leaders have focused too much on the ideal in the past, not the reality of married life. He encourages priests and bishops to look at the situations facing the faithful and help form their consciousness. Ed Pentin, Rome correspondent for the National Catholic Register, joins us now. Ed, what are the highlights of the document in your view?
Well, Lauren, it's a very long document, and being so long, it can take in a lot of information about the situation facing the family today, which is very complex, of course. So there's a whole gamut of problems and challenges facing the family, which are included in the text, which I think will be very helpful to people. So that's been really the main highlight of this. But it's really also, as Cardinal Schönborn said at the press conference today, there's a change in tone in this document, which he said was seen throughout the synods, which is sort of more merciful, less condemnatory, and he sees that as a very great advantage of this document. He calls it a linguistic text.
So specifically, what is it going to change for practicing Catholics?
Well, not a lot on the face of it. I mean, in the text, there isn't any sort of fundamental changes. Of course, there can't be any changes to doctrine, but what there can be is changes to pastoral practice. And in terms of the sort of hot-button issues like whether divorced and remarried Catholics can receive Holy Communion, that is not explicitly stated in the document, but it can be made sort of up to interpretation. So it's not clear really just how much this document will change, it really depends on how much sort of the pastoral practice impacts it and how that's taken forward in individual parishes and dioceses.
You have your ear to the ground in Rome. What reception is it receiving?
Well, it's a mixed one. Obviously, it depends who you talk to, but some are very happy with it. They think it's a great step forward. It's a very different kind of document to what sort of pastoral documents in the past from previous popes. And as I say, it covers a lot of ground, and they're very happy about that. But there is some concern, and the concern is the ambiguity in the text and the fact that it can be interpreted in various different ways. And there's two aspects to this, discernment and conscience, which play a key role in this document, which detractors say could be problematic in the sense that they sort of take precedent over the Church's teaching.
Ed Pentin, Rome correspondent for the National Catholic Register, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Lauren.
The Joy of Love gives advice to married couples, like developing a routine of a morning kiss or an evening blessing. Other parts of the document are making waves in the U.S. Church. Catherine Szeltner has reaction from the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. Catherine.
Lauren, the head of the U.S. bishops calls this exhortation a love letter to families. But Archbishop Korte is clear. This document needs to be read slowly and more than once.
We're Americans, and we want to get to the bottom line.
The president of the U.S. bishops cautions a rushed read of Amoris Laetitia, or else, he says, you'll miss Pope Francis's message.
He's saying, yes, we have issues, and yes, we have problems, and we have lots of difficulties, but let's begin, first of all, with celebrating, well, you heard the title, the joy of loving.
Critics say the document's language on forming the conscience is vague and leaves room for misinterpretation. Kurtz disagrees because he says Pope Francis is building on the work of past popes.
He's going to rely very much on his predecessors, on what St. John Paul II has said, on what Pope Benedict, and I should say also Pope Paul VI.
But if you saw today's headlines, you'd think otherwise. Church historian Dr. Matthew Bunson isn't surprised by the spin.
A lot of very careful cherry picking of some of the things he said, some of the ambiguities in the text, and to be sure they're there, that are then being spun to advance an agenda that I do not believe Pope Francis intends.
Family law professor Dr. Helen Alvarez says the text hits home for American families. She says there's a lot of practical advice for couples.
It's among the most gifted address on the question of another person is here, hello, that I have ever seen in the context of marriage. It's the idea of the daily kindnesses. When someone is talking, listen to them.
Archbishop Korte says the takeaway message is this: each family has dignity and Christ is in love with every family. He hopes parishes take the time to unpack the entire document over future retreats. Lauren.
Catherine Szeltner, thank you for reporting. Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. Investigators say they caught a key terror suspect who may have had a role in the Brussels and Paris terror attacks. A French official says Mohamed Abrini is the mysterious man in the hat seen on surveillance video leaving the Brussels airport after the bombing. But investigators in Belgium say it's still unclear the attacks killed a total of 162 people. A senior Vatican official accuses Democratic presidential candidate Bernie Sanders of showing a monumental discourtesy in his lobbying for an invitation to a church-sponsored conference. That's according to Bloomberg News. The Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences asked the Democratic presidential candidate to speak at next week's conference on social, economic, and environmental issues. Sanders is Jewish and at odds with some Catholic Church teachings. But he says he was, quote, very moved by the invitation and is a big fan of the Pope. The Vatican meeting comes just days before New York's presidential primary. Another Catholic Church leader criticizes the University of Notre Dame's choice to honor Vice President Joe Biden. Cardinal Raymond Burke says you can't overlook Biden's violations of moral law, like his support for abortion and non-traditional marriage. Notre Dame plans to give Biden, along with former Speaker of the House John Boehner, its Laetare Medal. British Prime Minister David Cameron is under fire after he admits to profiting from an offshore tax haven. Cameron is the latest politician dealing with fallout from this week's Panama Papers scandal. Wyatt Goolsby reports.
David Cameron comes clean, admitting he profited from his father's investments in an offshore tax haven before he was elected, accusations that could threaten his political career. It comes just days after Iceland's prime minister resigned his post. He and other world leaders are on the defensive after the release of millions of records on offshore financial dealings known as the Panama Papers.
There's a huge industry here that we're looking at. And I think that's probably one of the big takeouts from this is the size of this industry and the amount of money that flows through.
Investigative journalists released the millions of leaked records from a Panama law firm that detail how many are hiding assets in offshore companies to avoid paying taxes.
He's doing not for minimizing the taxes, not secretly, nothing.
Among those accused, the Ukrainian president, the Argentine president, the Chinese president, and hundreds of other officials from various governments around the world. Most continue to deny they did anything wrong. Russian President Vladimir Putin was not mentioned by name, but it does list someone who could have acted as a frontman. Putin says the scandal is part of a Western plot to weaken Russia. The head of the EU's finances says he is outraged and furious after hearing the reports. He says they will take action if they find EU laws have been broken.
It's not just the EU that's taking action. Several countries have launched their own investigations. The president of Panama says his government will work to boost transparency and cooperate with other nations. Lauren.
Wyatt Goolsby reporting. Thank you. In a surprise visit to Iraq's Secretary of State, John Kerry praises U.S. and Iraqi troops fighting ISIS. Kerry met with the country's prime minister His trip coincides with military advances. Iraqi forces say yesterday they entered a strategically important ISIS-held town. In Afghanistan, the official responsible for monitoring corruption has resigned. He says he was ordered to bend the rules for senior politicians. The unity government, brokered by Secretary Kerry, is in disarray. The UN expects this year to be as deadly as last year, when more than 11,000 people were killed or wounded. Turning back to our top story tonight, Catholics around the world are reacting to the Holy Father's document on family life, and theologians are breaking down some of its more complex sections. Pia de Solenni is a professor of moral theology at the Augustine Institute and an award-winning theologian. Is the Church cracking the door to allowing divorced and civilly remarried Catholics to receive Holy Communion?
It depends on how you look at it. The document that came out today, the exhortation, clearly states that there's no change in church teaching. The Pope is urging people who are in irregular situations to do the best that they can to normalize their situations. That's why he put out 2 documents reforming annulment process not too long ago. He's encouraging pastors to encounter people in these situations and help them to begin this process to see if they could normalize their situations. So it's a yes and no question, but it's not throwing church teaching out in order for people to approach the Eucharist.
Well, in a footnote, he says that the confessional shouldn't be a torture chamber. Is he putting the burden on priests to provide better formation for Catholics? Because it seems to me that there, as you say, is a lot of ambiguity in this document.
The Pope has constantly been pushing for a reform in the clergy. That's nothing new. And so I think he does see that the priests are supposed to be servants. I mean, that's the word, the Catechism uses the word servant to describe the priest. And so we have people in these living very difficult situations. We all know people in those situations if we're not in them ourselves. It's incredibly common, unfortunately. And it's the pastors, the priests, who really ought to be meeting them. And, as he said before, pastors should smell like the flock. They should smell like the sheep.
Pia, what about Catholics who think this document has gone too far?
Well, first of all, I would urge them to do a very careful reading of the text. It certainly shows a consistency. There are tons of referrals, probably close to 30 to Familiaris Consortio, which is John Paul II's exhortation on the family. And the Pope is really asking people to, in irregular situations, and frankly, all of us, we are all in need of healing. We are all sinners, to really wrestle with our consciences and to grow. And the language here parallels the language on conscience in the Catechism. It is a work of conscience. It is a struggle.
Pia de Solenni, Associate Dean of the Augustine Institute's Satellite Campus in Orange County, thank you for joining us.
Good to be with you.
Coming up, political fallout, the debate over President Obama's Supreme Court nominee, and a Tennessee lawmaker defends his religious freedom bill, how it's designed to protect therapists. Pope Francis thanks members of the Papal Foundation today for their generosity. The group says it will give $10 million to support the Holy Father's charitable causes. Since it started in 1990, the Papal Foundation has collected more than $120 million. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Lauren Ashburn. A Tennessee state senator defends his religious freedom bill. Jack Johnson says counselors should be able to refer patients to someone else in the case of religious objection. If it passes, Tennessee would be the first state to allow therapists to pick what kind of client they're willing to serve.
No law, no American Counseling Association, and no code of ethics should require a counselor to provide counseling when someone seeks counseling for a subject matter that the counselor disagrees with.
Johnson's bill has been called a hate bill by some mental health professionals. They say it would be an infringement of the government on a profession that's capable of governing itself. The media is extensively covering today's unveiling of the Pope's document on marriage and family life. But is their reporting accurate? Joining us now, Raymond Arroyo, host of EWTN's The World Over. We are delighted to have you. Thank you.
Delighted to be here.
So, on this new document that's coming out of the Vatican, let's talk about the media. AP says the Pope insists conscience, not rules, must lead the faithful. This is a complex pastoral issue. Is the media getting it right?
Well, it's 256 pages, Lauren. I mean, none of us are getting it right. It's 256 pages. I mean, everybody's trying to find the part they can hold on to. Look, the first part of this, the first 7 chapters, are a beautiful meditation on the family. It reinforces and explains church teaching on the family.
And then comes
Chapter 8. And Chapter 8, with what I call the smoking footnote, you can look it up on Twitter, it has a line in it that speaks to communion for divorced and remarried Catholics. Now, this was a big controversy for those 2 big synods that preceded this document. The Pope seems to be opening a door here. There is a door being opened for divorced and remarried Catholics. With a pastor's consultation, they can come to some agreement, and the sacraments could be made available to them.
Let's get back to the media. Now, is the Pope changing perception through the media to be more welcoming, to have people more welcomed? And is he doing this in the right way?
Well, look, the Pope has always had a heart for the marginalized, the forgotten. I think clearly he's trying to modulate the language of the church. Here you will not find the word adultery. I think it's mentioned once. Living in sin, that kind of language is forsaken for irregular situations, is what he calls them, of various stripes of families that you might find. So he's obviously trying to soften things and make the church more welcoming. The challenge this raises for many canonists and bishops I've spoken to, forget media professionals who don't know what to make of the document.
What to do and say. The Washington Post says he offers hope to divorced Catholics, says no to gay marriage.
Well, he does.
Button it up.
Yeah, and that's true. He is offering hope to divorced Catholics and all people. The question is, what does this mean in practice? And look, a year ago, I predicted the Pope would probably change or modulate practice, and that would have doctrinal implications. I think that's what's happening here, but we'll have to see. This is an exhortation. He's not speaking ex cathedra. He's not speaking infallibly. We don't know what this really means just yet, but it'll play out in time.
And we know we will be on it. Especially you, the host of World Over with Raymond and Arroyo.
At this point, all I want to do is go on my book.
Thursdays at 7 p.m. Go sign your books. Thank you so much for joining us.
Take
care.
Thank you.
Up next, road to the White House. Ted Cruz's rocky trek to gain support of his fellow senators. And the popularity of Pope Francis. Which countries like him the most? Today we remember Mother Mary Angelica 1 week after her funeral. Our foundress died on Easter Sunday at the age of 92. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Presidential candidate Ted Cruz is looking for some love from his fellow senators. So far, few have agreed to endorse him, this after a history of hostility. Ted Cruz says the GOP is rallying behind him.
You are looking at the entire spectrum of the Republican Party, the entire ideological spectrum coming together and uniting.
But one influential group is still holding out, his colleagues.
I think it has made it more difficult for senators to be supportive of him. If we're going to save this country, it's going to be in the Senate. And I think most people would wish that he would take the Senate more seriously.
Many GOP senators dislike Cruz after 2 years of bitter infighting. They say he is engaged in divisive tactics to bolster his profile, most notably a 16-day government shutdown in 2013, demanding Republican support to defund Obamacare.
And the Republicans in this body, sadly, more than a few of them, say we will take lots and lots of symbolic votes against Obamacare. But there's nothing we can do.
Conservative activists love Ted Cruz, especially those frustrated with party leaders. But in the Capitol, it has come at a price as Cruz looks to defeat Donald Trump.
Well, I think it's made it a little more difficult for him to round up support.
On the campaign trail, Cruz has called his colleagues part of a corrupt Washington cartel. And he took the unusual step last year of taking to the Senate floor and accusing Majority Leader Mitch McConnell of being a liar.
I cannot believe he would tell a flat-out lie.
Many still think he went too far.
I don't think it went over very well with McConnell.
And some think it's time for Cruz to apologize.
I stood up and said he should. Yeah, I think that was the wrong thing to do.
Yet Cruz quietly enlisted former Senator Phil Gramm, a longtime Washington insider, to do some damage control. Gramm tells CNN, quote, "Ted called me and asked me to help him in building a working relationship with the leadership of the House and Senate." Cruz may soon receive another endorsement from freshman Dan Sullivan of Alaska.
I get along very well with Senator Cruz.
But Senator Lindsey Graham, a longtime critic and now Cruz supporter, says the Texas freshman needs to do more.
I think Ted would be well served to reach out to his colleagues. The more support he gets from across the spectrum of the Republican Party, the more viable alternative he becomes to Trump.
And a big question still remains. Will his one-time rival, Senator Marco Rubio, support him?
No, I haven't even thought about the presidential race at all.
The next big primary is in New York on April 19th. That's Donald Trump's home turf, and he's leading in the polls there. It has been a busy week at the White House. My compatriot in the White House press corps breaks down this week's headlines with me. Gregory Korte is a White House correspondent for USA Today. Welcome to the program.
Good to be here.
President Obama went to the University of Chicago Law School yesterday. He said something pretty surprising in his remarks. Put the hammer down, saying Democrats could retaliate by denying future GOP nominations. And this is as the Senate is refusing to hold hearings on his nomination, Chief Judge Merrick Garland. Is this rhetoric productive, counterproductive, surprising, not surprising?
It certainly seems to up the ante, doesn't it?
It does.
That he says that this is not just about this one nomination. This could affect nominations well into the future. And it actually acknowledges something that neither side wants to admit, and that is that if the shoe were on the other foot in this situation, if it were a Republican president in the last year of his presidency making a nomination of a conservative judge to fill what's considered a liberal seat on the court, the roles would be reversed, and the Democrats would be acting the same way as Republicans.
We saw this week Republican Susan Collins and John Bozeman met with Chief Judge Merrick Garland, and it seems there could be a shift. Is that your analysis?
Well, if you talk to Senate leadership, they would say no, there's been zero shift on this because a meeting is not a hearing. Mm-hmm. There's always been these sort of more informal one-on-one meetings with a presidential nominee to the Supreme Court, and those will continue, and there are many Republicans who will give him the courtesy of a meeting. Whether that translates into a hearing, what the White House is hoping is that will generate some momentum. The more of these informal meetings they have, the argument they're making is, if you can meet with them one-on-one, why not meet them in public, in front of the TV cameras, under oath, at a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing, and hear what he has to say and let everybody hear what his judicial philosophy is. If they can, at that point, then they can get a vote. And if they can get a vote, maybe they'll get forward.
Right. President Obama surprised us, popped into the White House this week talking about tax inversions. Was this surprising to you? This is when U.S. companies buy small companies overseas so that they can use a foreign address to get out of paying taxes in the U.S.
It was surprising to see him in the briefing room talking about this. The Treasury Department actually announced it the night before, and it got sort of buried in the financial press. It really didn't get the traction that the president wanted. And of course, when the president speaks, an issue gets a lot more attention. He actually sort of said that, I'm here because I want this to get more attention.
And it worked.
And it worked.
It sank a deal.
It sank a deal. Now, the Treasury Department and the White House both said, look, this was not targeted to any one deal. This was a rule that had been in development for 2 years. The Treasury Department's been working on this. This is not a reaction to any one deal, but it did sink one very high-profile deal between two drug companies. And it also comes as the Justice Department is becoming very aggressive in terms of mergers from an antitrust perspective. And so in the last year of Obama's presidency, he's really sort of exerting some muscle on these high-profile corporate mergers.
Shows the power of the president and the press. Gregory Korte, White House correspondent for USA Today, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Pope Francis has won the hearts and minds of people around the globe, but some countries love him more than others. A WIN Gallup poll shows the Pope's positive image is highest in Portugal, followed by the Philippines, Argentina, and Italy. In North America, his support is higher in Canada than the U.S. Pollsters say Pope Francis is a leader who transcends his own religion, and he has the highest global ranking among world leaders. For the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Lauren Ashburn. Thanks for watching. Good night, and God bless.